Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour, and today is Friday, March 7th, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeannie Rice on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Rice's book. His book is titled Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. And it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 20 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into a productive and useful part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again, absolutely free. You can also download a whole host of audio files of shows just like this one where people have been stepped through the worksheet process. And if you choose to listen to them even repeatedly, they can serve as a powerful tutorial for you to help you get maximum benefit from these tools in the shortest amount of time possible. You can also go to your App Store and type in the three words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. And if you choose to do that, before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. If you tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and it contains a copy of the Dragon Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. And we hope you do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives, and secondarily because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, we'd appreciate you doing so. You can email me at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org, and or you can email Jeannie at jeanie@whyagain.org. That's whyagain.org. If you're listening to us on the internet at live.needle.com/mindshiftersradio, we're grateful to have you here. We're glad you're choosing to spend the time with us. And from that platform, you're not able to send us a comment or tap the phone icon to actually talk to us directly. So to do that, you would need to go to your App Store and download Needle, Nedl, AI Tuner for live radio. And once you do that, open up the app, sign in, answer a couple questions, and you'll have the opportunity to either type a comment in the app or tap the phone icon and speak to us voice to voice, which we greatly appreciate whenever anybody chooses to do that, either through email or comment in the app or voice to voice, because it just makes it beyond words easier for us to live into our intention with this work. The intention we have with this work is to be of service, and that's infinitely easier to do when we know how these things are landing for you. And we are grateful because it it helps guide our choices and our activity in the show. And we're also grateful when that happens because the vast majority of times shows have ended up being highlight shows or a best of show is the result of someone just like you calling in and asking a question or making a statement or refuting something that is being taught. And it can be what you would think is a silly question or, something you've heard us talk about dozens of times, but it's still posing a question for you. And what we would ask you to do is understand that if you have the question, it's everybody's question. And everybody who is engaged in their own work and who's willing to learn and grow can benefit from asking it again and again and again. So please let us know how these things are landing for you. I'm grateful that today, I believe it's the only day of this week, as I started the show, the Needle app decided to send me a notification that we were starting the show. So with luck, we'll have even more listeners live today than we have in the past week. And if you have a comment or a question, please raise a hand, type it into the app. I will make an effort throughout the call to keep checking the app because it has the habit of not notifying me when people have typed in a comment or when they raise a hand to say hello on the phone. So the topic I wanted to start with today has to do with this idea of living in an energetic universe and living in the question. And there are many aspects to living in an energetic universe and to understanding that we are not simply the physical beings that we are trained to think of ourselves as, and that we have energetic connections. Jung would call them synchronicities that are happening all the time. And some people call them, little miracles, little coincidences, um, glimmers. Some people call them glimmers. And Dr. Michael Rice has a number of examples he's given over the years where people have been at Heartland doing an intense piece of work. And soon after an intense piece of work is done, someone they haven't talked to in years or heard from in decades reaches out to them. And sometimes it's someone they've been estranged from, and sometimes it's someone that they've been connected to, but they raise a topic that they've never raised before. And the the idea behind sharing these stories is just to let people know that kinds of things that the Course in Miracles lets us know when it says, when you heal, you are never healed alone. And this is not, a concept that's just related to Dr. Michael Rice or Course in Miracles. I was listening to a podcast this morning from a young woman that I will probably have an interview with. And she has a multicultural life experience. And as she's talking about how we didn't just show up here. We are representing our bloodline. We got stuff from our grandparents and great grandparents, and it's not just physical features, it's energetics. It's the family history. It's a tendency to talk with our hands or a tendency to be more loud or more quiet. And as she was discussing these things in the interview I was listening to, she sounded like she's taking, you know, could easily be stuff coming right out of Dr. Michael Rice's mouth for some of his lectures over the years. And I've had a few of these, none that just jump out at me to share, but I had somebody come in today and say, "Hey, this amazing thing happened that one day I did a worksheet and it had to do with my, difficult relationship with my father, and then a day or two later, my sisters came for a visit and they didn't know that I had done this worksheet, and the conversation develops around my father and the very same dynamic that was in my worksheet. And they both had pretty much polar opposite experiences with my father. So, the way we're taught to think about ourselves as solid physical beings and to think about the body like a machine and the brain like a machine. From that context, when you have an experience like this, it seems like a Twilight Zone episode. It seems like, a woo woo ESP, otherworldly, uh, beings from another dimension kind of a situation. And yet, if you don't throw that label on it, if you don't judge it or yourself for having that experience, most of us have had similar experiences. Most of us, I'll say, of a certain age. We've had experiences where we haven't talked to somebody in years or at least, months and months. And then all of a sudden, we'll have a thought about them and then the phone will ring or we'll get a text or an email from them. Or somebody else will start talking to us about that other person. And the ways in which we are connected and always connected will continually amaze you until you wake up and realize, oh, wait, that's just how the world works. There's nothing unusual about this. There's something wonderful about it. There's something, about the fabric of life that's playing out when that's happening. But it only seems weird or strange because we've been conditioned to believe that we're solid physical beings and nothing else, rather than understanding what so many of these deep spiritual teachings would teach us is that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. And I know I've mentioned it, but it's been a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, since I've mentioned the podcast, The Telepathy Tapes. And the telepathy tapes will, if you listen to them, seriously have you seriously questioning what you've been told about how your mind works and your mind is contained within your brain and your body, etc. And while I know people that would absolutely laugh and disregard and try to offer many different ways to refute what's offered in the telepathy tapes, I also know that there's a lot more going on here than we can be aware of just through our five senses. And I know that our science is aware of that, which is why they develop things like Geiger counters. What's a Geiger counter? It's a technical device to try and register awareness of something that does not register within our five senses. I know that our science understands that there's a lot more going on here than we can register with our five senses. That's why they have devices that can measure ultraviolet and infrared. That's why we have things like X-ray machines and MRIs, because our senses can't perceive things at the same level as these devices can when they take into account energies that are in existence, that are right here where we are right now, that our senses can't register. So if there's a lot more going on here than our senses can register in any given moment, then it shouldn't be so surprising to us when things happen that don't fit the solid physical model. How is it possible that someone knows what I'm thinking? How is telepathy possible? How is it possible that I do a worksheet on something and a day or two later, one of my siblings who doesn't even know I'm doing a worksheet addresses that very same issue within the family dynamics in a conversation with me? Well, most of us, because we've been trained to think of the world as purely physical place and us as physical beings, most of us just say, oh, it's coincidence, and we ignore it. And that's the same kind of thing that happens when our medical doctors have somebody who's been diagnosed with a cancer, they see the tumor, they measure it, they say, yeah, this is bad, we have to get it out. They make the arrangements to have the surgery, and the day of the surgery or the day before the surgery, they go in for a scanning test or whatever, and there's no sign of the tumor. Well, rather than ask, how did this happen? What are the factors involved? How could we replicate it? Our medical science these days says, oh, I guess it was a misdiagnosis. They pretend it never happened rather than stretch their thought model and their perceptual model to be something that's flexible enough to comprehend or to take into account the fact that this did happen. And when it happens and we're willing to engage it, accept it, embrace it, and work with it, ask questions about it, we can learn and we can grow. When it happens and we shut down and ignore it, we stay stuck. We stay sedentary. And the the invitation in our work is to start opening ourselves up, to start questioning everything. Question everything you hear on this internet show, question everything we do in the support groups, question everything you're taught in school, question every belief you've ever had. Not just to be a rebel, but because it's the most effective way that I know to stay actively engaged in life in the present moment rather than be obsessed about the past or the future and then basically miss the flow of life in the moment. Last night in our support group, I had gotten a few intuitive hits during the week to go back to the video that you can watch on YouTube for free. It's a documentary that was done by National Public Radio or Television, National Public Broadcasting. I forget what city created this, but it's a documentary titled Stress: Portrait of a Killer. And in that, basically an hour-long documentary, it talks about the negative impact of the stresses that we create and the insight they have from studying baboons and other monkeys and humans in various work settings and our history of traumas like a famine that happened in one particular area uh, and the really detailed records they have about the people that came from that area so they can follow them and they can look at what were the ongoing impacts of this trauma, this stressor. And the bottom line of it is that they understand, and they talked about it in that documentary, that our stress is sometimes created by environmental factors, stress being any situation that requires us to make an accommodation to survive it or to deal with it. And so some of those things are environmental factors like the famine that hit, but others are internally moderated by the meaning that we give to things. And so, if I think this particular job I'm in is important for my survival and my boss doesn't like me and I hate this job, but I've got to stay and I won't survive if I get fired, and I'm going to create a much, much higher level of stress than if I go into the very same work setting and I think, well, I'm here. I'm going to do the best I can to be loving and respectful to myself and others today. And if the job lasts, it lasts. And if it doesn't, I don't know how, but I'll find something else. Then I create an entirely different level of stress within me. If I look at my boss and I say, this guy's a jerk and he hates me and and I don't know why I can't ever satisfy him, and something's wrong with me that I can't satisfy him, I get one level of stress. And if I look at my boss and the anger or the harsh tone or the criticisms that come from him or her, and I realize that that anger, that irritability, those harsh tones, those insults and criticisms couldn't come out of that person unless there was pain, fear, or sadness in them, and I hold compassion for them, and I don't take it personally, and I understand that whatever comes out of their mouth is not about me, it's about them, then I create an entirely different level of stress. There will be stress. I'll have to respond. I'll have to, think about how to respond. And yet, the stress level I create is independent of their action, which is why there's a bottom line observation in my 10 bottom line observations that says, whatever happens to me and around me in my life is nowhere near as important as how I choose to interpret and respond to those events. So here we are, we're doing Mind Shifters support groups, we're doing Mind Shifters radio. Why would I, in this spiritually oriented set of teachings that we read from, whether it's Way of Mastery or Course in Miracles or Kai Finley's work, why would I play a documentary about the physical body and its response to stress? Because the stress is not physical in nature, it's created and resonates through our energy system, whether you think of it as physical, mental, or emotional, whether you think of it as solid or completely energetic. And the energy field responds to our mind energy. And as we create upset and tension, and as we judge things as bad or wrong, we create more upset and tension, then we create more of this disruption in the energy field. And then everything about our physical bodies functions differently. And so every last one of us can benefit from using tools like the reality management worksheet. Every time I do a reality management worksheet, I open the possibility to drop a little bit more of the stress I'm creating because I cancel my thoughts, I cancel my goals, I cancel my need to be right, I cancel my need for anyone or anything else to change, including myself, and I ask to be shown what's the hidden part of my own mind that's creating this stress or tension or negative emotion. So the the invitation, as always in this work, is to move gradually toward that 100% responsibility for everything I experience inside of me, especially my emotional responses to things. And we had a relatively new person in the group last night who was asking about what is this mind shifters or what is this still point breathing? And we talked about how it's just a breath technique that Michael and Jeannie have found very useful, and Michael has distilled out of other trainings he's had and insights he's gotten, where it's flowing connected breath, where you don't pause between the in breath and the out breath, and you breathe with your mouth open and you just allow. And the still point is that point where the body naturally just pauses in the breath. And Michael's theory is that when that happens, lots and lots of energy is getting processed through the system. And when people do this still point breathing, sometimes they have a very quiet, relaxed, meditative time. And sometimes they have wailing and gnashing of teeth and physical spasms. Sometimes they've got flooded with kundalini energy and they have healings, and it's all over the map. You don't know what you're going to get, but you open yourself to the experience. And if Michael's right about that, what's happening is you're processing through and getting rid of energies that are not beneficial. They're not needed. So you're unloading energetic tensions and stresses, just like you unload energetic tension and stress when you do a mind shifter and you keep banging the gong for repeating a statement, and every time you write the statement it adds energy to the parts in your mind that might hold an objection to that statement, and then you just let yourself write about it, and you let the repetition of writing the statement and speaking the statement out loud add energy to the content in your unconscious mind until it spills out on the paper, and you start journaling things that maybe you hadn't thought of in years or decades, and or it's a whole series of things that you have always thought about, but when you look back on them and you're reading this writing over and over again, you start to see patterns and connections you wouldn't see any other way. You can't see the patterns and connections when these things are floating around in your mind when they haven't been written down. So you become aware of negative beliefs you might hold, unproductive associations you might have connected the dots in a certain way that leaves you feeling less than safe, less than calm, less than compassionate. And then you can erase the lines and rearrange the dots and see, oh, wait a minute, this is just the flow of life. There's no reason for me to create pain and suffering on top of this. And so you relieve stress. You undo the mechanisms in you that was creating stress, and then you learn to use that mechanism of managing your goals and managing your thoughts and managing your expectations so that you manage your stress and you use it as a productive tool rather than as a curse in your life. So we're about the halfway mark of our call, and I notice that we have some people on the app. Thank you for listening. And again, please remember to feel free to put your hand up or type a comment, because even if I'm in the middle of what seems like a monologue or reading from a book, your thoughts, your input are valued and welcome. Checking the app here quickly, making sure that nobody has a hand up, no comments in the app. So I'm going to return to reading from the book Of Course in Miracles by Alan Cohen. The subtitle is When Love Becomes a Way of Life. Where we left off was in the reading of the 23rd chapter. It's titled Hastening the Last Judgment. Alan writes, after I moved into a new home in a well-manicured neighborhood, I discovered down the road a large empty lot strewn with junk cars, rusty trucks, and unsightly trash. I grew distraught as I foresaw guests coming to my home and passing this ugly scene, and I resented the lot owners for messing up the neighborhood. A few days later, the shipping container holding my family's possessions from our previous home arrived at the local port. When I hired a trucker to deliver the container, he informed me that the 45-foot container would not be able to negotiate a sharp turn into our subdivision. The trucker suggested, why don't you ask the guy who owns the empty lot of the corner if you can park the container there while you unload it? Suddenly, this empty lot became more attractive. I phoned the owner, who was quite congenial, and told me, sure, no problem. And we had the container delivered there. And we kept it on the site for a few days until we completed the unloading. Now, as I look back, I can see how hasty and short-sighted my judgments were about the lot owner and the lot. When he agreed to help me, instantly the lot became a gift rather than a problem, and the owner became a good neighbor. Now, when I pass that lot, I have a pleasant and grateful memory about it. Then he quotes the workbook, lesson 164, where it says, from the Course in Miracles, where it says, and in his judgment will a world unfold in perfect innocence before your eyes. And his judgment is capital H. So this is in the Creator's judgment. Everything that unfolds is perfect just as it is. It's innocent and perfect because it's unfolding. This is not what we're trained to believe. And yet, it's entirely possible, and some would argue preferable, to live your life from the perspective of that whatever happens is perfect just as it's happening. And if it's happening with you there to witness it, the impact it has on you and your ability to stay loving and extend your loving nature in that moment is another part of the perfection unfolding. Ellen goes on and he writes, a judgment is one snapshot of a person or situation in a moment from one angle. And yet there are always other angles that reveal very different facets. When we achieve a shift in perception, the bad can become the good, an enemy can become a friend, and the empty can become full. While visiting a petting zoo, I observed a customer at the snack bar making a loud, nasty scene because he didn't like the service. As I watched the incident, I made a mental note to avoid the unruly man. A few minutes later, as I was passing the deer enclosure, I saw the back of a man kneeling to feed a deer. As the fellow was kind and sweetly and stroked the deer's face, he reminded me of St. Francis. Then the man turned his head, and I saw it was the saintly soul, was the same very devil who had caused the big ruckus at the snack bar. And instantly my view of him with the deer fulfilled the prayer of A Course in Miracles workbook, lesson 161, where it says, quote, give me your blessing, Holy Son of God, close quotes. Ellen writes, we've all practiced judgment for much of our lives. We were taught to judge at a tender age. We were taught to like this and hate that. We were taught to approve of or reject people as our parents would indicate it to us, and we inherited their gender, ethnic, racial, religious, political, and cultural prejudices. We also learned terrible judgments about ourselves. You're too fat. Why don't you get better grades like your older sister? Why don't you go into the family profession? You'll be a failure and will be embarrassed. Don't cry. People will think you're a sissy. No one will marry you past a certain age, and on and on and on. We have we aren't even aware of how thoroughly we've been conditioned to believe unquestioningly those things that we're living our lives from, basically. It's a wonder, he says, that we continue to get up each morning and trudge through our days when you recognize what a load of burdensome beliefs we're carrying. Fortunately, the Holy Spirit has an answer to the world of judgment. Of Course in Miracles tells us very plainly, quote, God did not create a meaningless world, close quotes. That's from the workbook, lesson 14. Alan writes, the world of judgment is not the Creator's world. It is a sick story the ego made up. It's fabricated from fear. The ego itself comes from fear, the fear of separation, the fear of being less than, the fear of judgment. So here's the answer that the Holy Spirit has to the world of judgment. The world of judgment is not God's world. It's a sick story that's made up by the ego, fabricated from fear. The Holy Spirit, however, has another story. And in the workbook, lesson 97, it says, quote, Spirit am I, a holy Son of God, free of all limits, safe, healed, and whole, free to forgive and free to save the world. Alan writes, Rumi described freedom from judgment in this way. And then he gives the quote, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I will meet you there, close quotes. And it is to this field that A Course in Miracles invites us. But we must be vigilant to plant ourselves firmly in the field. It's tempting to drop back into fear, doubt, and criticism. And for that reason, Rumi urges us 3 times in the same poem, don't go back to sleep. So I'm noticing that Susan Bingham has her hand up. Are you there, Susan? Welcome, Susan Bingham.
Dr.
If
Tim?
you're talking, yes.
Oh, good, good. I almost hate to interrupt this because this is a great reading. I had a thought going back to where you were talking about how the mind affects the body. And this is a personal experience, and it leads to a couple of questions. But years ago, I started losing my eyesight and ended up having corneal transplants when I was in my mid-20s. And when I was given those, I got my sight back and I went on with the rest of my life. Now, at my age now, I went to see an eye doctor and he said, you should be taking steroid drops. Why? Because there's a danger of rejection. In fact, it's amazing you've kept these corneas this long. These corneas are not viable after about 11 to 15 years. I said, well, nobody ever told me that. And so I figured they were mine from the beginning, and they have been. And I don't want to take any steroids. Do they look bad? And he said, no, but there's always this danger. And I was just thinking about that as you were talking. Was it my mind that believed these corneas were mine for the rest of my life, and therefore I've kept them? You make me wonder. That's all.
Well, this ties in my mind to what I said earlier, that when there are exceptions to what the medical science or the medical world that thinks it's scientific believes should happen,
Yeah,
and when those exceptions occur, they're mostly just ignored
yeah.
rather than explored. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, how wonderful would it be to explore this and find out, guess what? If they simply told people these are yours and they'll be with you forever, there'd be next to no rejection of
Exactly.
of
That's
tissue.
right. Yeah.
And, is there ever likely to be research done on that? No.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because if the research pans out the way your experience is, it decreases the reliance on the medical model and these steroids they want you to take, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So the doctors can't make as much money and the drug companies can't make as much money, etc., etc., etc. And that's not to say that that's the only reason they're in it. It's just to say that because there's no money to be made in it, they won't pour the money into the research about the anomalies.
Yeah.
And they'll continue to preach from their belief system that because it's, an implant from somebody else, your body must reject it.
Yeah. Well, it's just
It's a great
blow.
story,
Yeah.
right? And it
Right.
ties right into what we're talking about, that,
Right.
my experience of life is infinitely more crafted by my choice and my belief system than I have any training to understand. So I can start questioning that for myself. I can start
Yeah.
exploring that for myself and probably discover a world of possibilities
Mm.
that can't be discovered unless I open it to questioning.
Right. And so a couple of weeks ago, I told Michael Rice that I was having hip problems, pain in the groin, sharp pains, clicking, difficulty lifting my right knee. And he had Jeannie looking up right away. Well, this is an inability to face. I think this is what I've made it mean out of what I think she said. Louise's Louise Hay's list of what things mean, and mine means difficulty facing the future, fear about the future. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not aware of being afraid of the future, and I've been thinking about that. And the fact is, my son and his wife are about to move away. They'll be away by the beginning of summer. They're going to sell their house. They are not sure which job his wife is taking, but we came here to be nannies to their little boys. And the little boys are grown up and gone. We're not needed that way except for dog sitting. In fact, I'm not home because I'm dog sitting. Um, and I was thinking, maybe I think of myself as really in touch with how I feel about things, but my hip is still sore. And I've been for x-rays and they say your bones are amazingly good and you've got good musculature and it looks as if you had a trauma there, like you stepped hard off a log or something at some point. I have no memory of doing anything to my leg, but I'm still having trouble with all kinds of things because as soon as you're limping, then your knee is affected, your foot's affected, everything sort of goes off kilter. That's my belief anyway. So I don't have a wake up sheet, but I was thinking I ought to do a wake up sheet on this. Um,
Or
and
several dozen.
right,
Because this
because
is a
maybe,
huge life event,
yeah, it
right?
is,
This
and
is this is family moving away.
Yeah.
And this
And
is
they,
critical part of your family that's been a defining part of your life
mhm.
for what, 30 years or more?
Well, we moved down with them 20 years ago, 21 or 2 years ago. So,
Okay, so for 20 years, this situation has been a defining part of your life and it's going to change.
in a big way. And there, my daughter is saying, "Oh, come and live with us," and my son is saying, "Come and live with us." And I'm thinking, you are at the fullest point in your life in various ways. They don't need some old people nearby to have to take care of, and we're not about to go anyway because we're living with another family, and we're so far, knock on wood, in basically good health. Uh, and Tim Bingham doesn't want to leave this area, and we have a lot of things that we've gotten connected to here. Uh, and so it would be hard to leave in some ways. So yeah, I mean, I don't need to go into it all. Everybody at our age goes through this, I imagine, if they are lucky enough to get old enough. But you're right, it's a big event, and I haven't really given it credit for being a big event. And I'm hoping that if I do those wake up sheets, I'll be able to run around the way I've always run around.
Well, it's
So,
probably a good bet that if you do those wake up sheets, you'll have a lot less discomfort in your hip. I don't know about
uh,
running around, I don't know where you want
well,
to run to or jumping but I'm I am a recipient of immense benefits from paying attention to Dr. John Sarno's work and
oh yeah,
understanding that the vast majority of my physical pain is not the result of physical injury, it's the result of this tension myoneural syndrome that he identified, and it's the result of mental emotional tension held in my body in different locations, and whenever that tension gets resonated into activity, when it causes muscle spasm, if it pinches off even 10% of blood flow to tissue,
yeah, that's so
that's enough
interesting.
to initiate
Hmm.
excruciating pain.
Yeah,
And when you think about this level of life change for you, if you're saying anything other than this is one of the biggest changes in my life, I'd say you're underestimating it.
I haven't even given it that much credit. So thanks for saying that because you're right. I think it is. It's so big, I haven't wanted to look at it. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and
Dr. Jim,
looking at
yeah,
it means moving forward.
yeah, it does.
What were you going to say, Dr.
Well, I
Tim?
was
What?
just going to say this is complicated, but I always hesitate to call in because I call in so much. So I watch to see if anybody else is in the queue, or when you say press one, or now it isn't press one anymore, but use the call button. I wait to make sure nobody else is calling because I feel guilty taking up so much time and getting so much mileage out of this radio show. And even, I have a voice in my head that says, "You've taken a ton from them. Give it up. Let somebody else call in." And if somebody did, I've told you, uh, you know, reroute the phone call. But that's just another issue. And I sort of get into fawning mode, saying, "Thank you for taking my call." It doesn't feel comfortable at all. It's very uncomfortable, this whole thing, what I'm doing.
Okay,
That's
well,
another wake up sheet.
so yeah, it is. It's another stack of worksheets. Um, I don't know how much your mind is letting you remember this, but I have heard more people than I can remember and count right now say things like, we love Susan's calls and her questions and her willingness, and we benefit from hearing Susan's questions. And The the truth of it is, what's quite likely happening is there are other people who are either too busy within their daytime hours to be listening live, or if they're listening, they're at work and they don't have the freedom, so to speak, or the liberty to call and
Mm,
disrupt their workday, and yet they would they would either really like to, or
mm-hmm,
they would really benefit from calling themselves, and yet they can't, or they
mm-hmm,
can't bring themselves to. So they get the benefit of you calling and stimulating the discussion in ways that has to be relevant to them because they're human beings,
mm. Yeah, we do share a lot of the same issues, I'm sure.
always, far more than there are differences.
Mm,
Remember that adage I came up with years ago that says, which is just a distillation of a variety of different teachings, and it says, the only significant difference between me and anybody that's ever lived or ever will live is the degree to which we're able to live in the realization that we're all the same.
mm,
Whatever differences there are almost completely irrelevant in the big picture.
yeah.
And the similarities go far beyond what you can think of or speak in a paragraph or two. So I'm just trying to remind you that I have heard, I know you've heard, you may not have registered them, but I have heard people thank you for being willing to call and raise questions and do worksheets and ask for clarification on things.
Well, I could say the same for other callers when they call in. It's almost always, I can key right into something and get a lot out of it. So I hope people feel less afraid. And the fact that this isn't like a ginormous audience, this is a community of repeat listeners, I'm imagining. We'd probably just be really glad to find ourselves all in the same airport somewhere and say, wow, you're that person. I would love that. Run into these people physically after all this time we've spent together on the radio show.
Well, and I assure you that the vast majority of them, with a possible exception here and there, the vast majority of them would feel the same way about you and your contributions and meeting you in an airport.
That's fun. It's a nice idea.
And whenever there's somebody who says, "Oh boy, I hope so and so doesn't call in again," that's their issue to work through,
Right. It
right?
is. Yeah.
The intimacy within a group setting, and this internet show and the community of people that listen to it and call in is a group setting.
Mm,
And what I know from people who have been masters at studying group dynamics with actual research on group dynamics is that all groups, if they stay together long enough, go through phases, and
mm-hmm.
each phase has developmental milestones and challenges.
Right.
And the the biggest challenge to a group staying together through the third phase is how it handles the scapegoat issue.
Oh, interesting.
And the scapegoat issue is that when a group stays together and is working through the first couple layers of boundaries and rules and respect and communication, if they stay together and they move into the third phase, I forget what was in the third or fourth phase that the scapegoat comes up. If the group decides, you know what, George is just too much of a loudmouth. George is always so negative.
Mm,
Get rid of George.
yeah.
If the group leader decides, okay, the thing to do is to get rid of George, or if the group itself overrides the leader who knows better and says, we're getting rid of George, that group will never progress in intimacy into the other phases that are possible. It just
Do you
won't
think
happen.
do you think on a radio show like this or an app like this though that we would ever get to the scapegoat phase? I doubt it.
Absolutely.
You think so?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh.
And we're talking about it right now. Let's just say hypothetically that somebody somewhere in the past sent me a message and said, "Oh, I just can't stand that Susan Bingham. She's always calling in."
That's what I picture.
Right, that's
Yeah.
what you picture. But let's just say, I mean, it's safe for me to do that because no one, to my memory, no one specifically has said that to me. What I've heard is far more. I love these calls. I love these questions. I'm so glad she called. She's got such good thoughts, etc. So let's just suppose that there was somebody like that, or three or four people.
Hmm.
And I thought, oh, these people are yacht owners and they've got millions of dollars and they might donate money to Michael so he could get this word out there. I want to please those people. So
Yeah.
I say to Susan privately or, out and out on the internet show, I say, listen, loudmouth, listen,
Yeah.
listen,
Yeah.
Gabby, give
Hmm.
somebody else a chance,
Yeah.
or why do you have to be so negative? And if I attack what you're doing or you as a person,
Hmm.
that will have ripple effects through everything else that happens.
Mm.
Anybody else who was thinking of calling
Yeah.
will be impacted by that.
Hmm.
Now, some might be impacted and empowered and say, good, I'm glad he got rid of her. I want to talk now and call, and they'll be full of themselves and they'll have their own issues and maybe they'll become the next
Hmm.
scapegoat. But most of what will happen is other people who might have been considering calling will say, "Nope, I don't want to risk having him turn on me the way he did on Susan." Which is what happens in the group. If the group gets rid of the scapegoat,
Mm.
it effectively tells everybody else in the group, "Look out. You step out of line, they'll kick you out too."
Oh yeah. I see.
So when you effectively acknowledge that the person who becomes the scapegoat is just giving voice to powerful dynamics that are already in the group. Remember how we just finished talking about how we all have the same issues.
Mm.
So when somebody is in a group and they get identified as a scapegoat, it's because they're giving voice to things other people in the group are thinking, but they're afraid to say.
Mm.
Or the other people say, well, I've thought that a little bit, but I wouldn't be as harsh. I mean, I wouldn't be as direct or I wouldn't be as
Yeah.
nasty as this person. So everybody's got the same kinds of energies flowing,
Hmm.
and somebody in the group energetic context gives voice to it. And if the group then says, let's squash that,
Mm.
then the group is no longer safe for people to voice their truth, their real feelings, their to take a risk.
So that gives you a lot. I realize it's not 1 o'clock already or 12 o'clock for you. That gives you a great responsibility to welcome everything and to work with everything, no matter what, and keep it safe.
Yes, or another way to say that is it's incumbent upon me to actually live what we're teaching.
Right.
And yes, that's the truth. And the more we live what we're teaching, the better this whole community is served by the teaching,
Mm,
right? The teaching doesn't have any benefit unless we live it. We're acting it out in our lives. If all
that's
we're doing
true.
is giving lip service to these teachings, there's no benefit to them at all.
Right. Oh, that's good. Thank you, Dr. Tim. I know you've got to go.
I have to
So,
go so that people can, if they want, turn on Podbean and listen to Michael and Jeannie, the last pre-recorded show, And I thank you so much for the call. As always, I will end your call. I'll remind us all that we come from love. We're made of the stuff that we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. Blessings.